I call the member for McKellar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The high dudgeon of the Minister for Financial Services rings somewhat hollow. The high dudgeon, in fact, indicates that perhaps he might feel he is stepping one step closer to being Minister for Finance, and the Minister for Finance one step closer to becoming the Treasurer, because it is the Treasurer that is here. It is the Treasurer who is here to answer that he has in fact misled this parliament. There has been much obfuscation about whether or not the question of the so-called email was the question that really has to be answered. But the real question to be answered is whether or not the Treasurer misled the parliament by saying that he had given no special attention to Mr Grant, when in fact all the evidence points to the fact that he has so given that special evidence or that special attention. And whilst we've heard a lot of mud throwing around this parliament, I guess we should remind ourselves that it was the Treasurer back into the year 2000 who gave in a brown paper bag $1,400 to the Democrats, and then said there was nothing wrong with this either, that it was perfectly normal practice for political parties to give money to their opposing people. Well, equally he is arguing now that there's nothing wrong with him giving special attention to somebody who is a mate of the Prime Minister and possibly even a mate of his. The question that has been now put forward is that the Prime Minister has said he will solve this problem by having the Auditor-General conduct an inquiry. Well, this so-called inquiry is supposed to answer all the questions that we will then see an end to any questions of probity. Well, there are a few things that have to be said about this so-called inquiry by the Auditor-General, and I would point out that the Auditor-General appeared before a public hearing this morning and he answered a number of questions relating to this so-called inquiry, and I happen to ask a lot of those questions. The first thing to say is that the Prime Minister has not ordered an audit by the Auditor-General, an inquiry. The Prime Minister has written to the Auditor-General and asked the Auditor-General if he will conduct an inquiry, a performance audit of I'm not quite sure what, because we didn't see the letter, but he said that it is up to him as Auditor-General to decide whether or not he accepts the request of the Prime Minister to conduct such an audit. He also went on to say, when I asked him what would be the terms of reference, that it was up to him, the Auditor-General, to determine and set the objectives of that inquiry. In the course of the public hearing this morning, we then went on to discuss how it would be possible to have such an inquiry if there was not power exercised by the Auditor-General to ask the Prime Minister and the Treasurer to give evidence to that inquiry on oath, to be sworn and give that evidence. It is said that it is very important, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we understand that the Prime Minister has not ordered an investigation or an inquiry by the Auditor-General. It is up to the Auditor-General to determine whether or not he accepts it, and then to set the objectives. And the objectives must include taking sworn evidence from both the Treasurer and from the Prime Minister, and further, it must include that all those communications, faxes and indeed emails that were between the Treasurer, his office and anybody else, where there is supposedly evidence that other people were treated and given the same advantage as Mr Grant, must be seen, because it is the tone of the letter, it is the tone of the assistance given to Mr Grant that just shows that there has been special attention given. And unless we see the other so-called pieces of evidence which we can then compare with that, then we will not have a proper inquiry at all. The Auditor-General answered in questions this morning that he would consider whether or not he would take evidence from the Prime Minister or the Treasurer. He would not give an undertaking that he would, which again causes great concern for me, and I'll end on this point, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that is that there has, in pulling the Auditor-General into this grubby political mire, we are now having a political assurance investigation, which means that the Auditor-General, who has to be like Caesar's wife and above suspicion, is being pulled in to this quagmire of political humbug that we have ever seen. The Leader of the Opposition has been quite correct in calling for the Treasurer to resign. On the evidence that is before the people right now, there is sufficient evidence for that to be done, and if he wishes to refute it, then we need to see all those correspondence, emails and faxes on the public record.
Order. The original question was